Hey there friends, David Lightbringer here, with a new series of videos, something of a distilled and concentrated world-building tour of some of the most magical and interesting and mysterious places in A Song of Ice and Fire. We'll be going beyond the wiki info, beyond the basic info, to reveal the secret lore of each location. That's what you guys want. That's the fun thing to do. And we'll also be attempting to examine the role that each of these magical locations plays in the story. Some of these places, like Karth or Winterfell or Storm's End, are places where our main characters come from, and thus they're primarily a part of that character's background and that character's family's background. And then other places like the House of the Undying or the House of Black and White or the Wall or Bloodraven's Cave are places that our main characters visit to sort of interact with the more magical elements of the story and potentially level up a bit. Basically, everything about the world building and lore of these places flows from the role that they play in the story. So that will be the frame that we use to talk about these places. First up is a little old place we call the House of the Undying from the SOC city of Karth. So let's start with the role that the House of the Undying plays in the story. Now, Karth, in general, is a great example of a place that a character visits to pretty much have their brains blown out by magic, and we're talking about Daenerys Targaryen, of course. Karth is George Martin's first attempt at depicting the magical, mysterious East, along with everything that we're learning about Ashai in the first couple of books. And originally, when George Martin was planning to have Dany go to Ashai, Karth is something of a place that set her on that path. It was going to be. So, for example, this is where Dany meets Quaithe in person, and Quaithe begins to give, I know they met outside Vaes Talora, but this is where they hang out and talk theology. This is where Quaithe begins to give Dany her mysterious advice. She urges Dany to leave Karth and come to Ashai. She mentions glass candles. She talks about Earthon Nightwalker and the glass candles are burning again. And then she does that two-finger wrist touch, which we think establishes a magical link to Dany so that she can later contact her via glass candles. So all that stuff in Karth is setting up Dany's planned visit to Ashai. And even though George has said that he's changed that, we don't have time for another long sea voyage or whatever. It seems like the glass candle is the way that Dany's going to visit Ashai, etc., etc. Check out Glass Candle Seeress and also Magical Secrets of the Glass Candle, or whatever the hell I called that video. There are a few other mysterious groups around Karth, like the Pureborn and the 13, that sort of enhance the mystery, enhance the mysterious vibe of Karth, but it's really all about the House of the Undying. And in fact, Dany's experience in the House of the Undying is so psychedelic that we can really only compare it to Bran's Weirwood Cave visit and his coma dream vision. And in fact, it seems like George is intending us to compare the two things because they are very, very similar. So the entrance to the House of the Undying is a giant face, and you go through the mouth. That's obviously very much like the Black Gate, which is a big weirwood face that Bran goes through the mouth of to eventually get to Bloodraven's Cave. There are tiny people there to serve up drugs made from the magic trees, obviously the Children of the Forest with the weirwood paste. And here we have a knee-high dwarf, literally as high as Dany's knee. Easy to miss that. We're talking less than 24 inches tall person, serving Dany the shade of the evening tree to dissolve the caul from her eyes and let her see the visions and stuff. So that's very similar. The taste of the drugs, famously, the description, the weirwood paste. Gonna get this video demonetized. The weirwood paste and the shade drink, the taste morphs through a series of flavors and sensations that are almost like memories, they're very comparable. And of course, the drugs, if you will, enable visions of the past, present, and future. They enable astral projection and mainly visions of everything. Now the catch, and there's always a catch with drugs, boys and girls, don't do drugs. The catch is that these visions just maybe are being manipulated by some very old wizards with their own agenda. And in fact, they are. In both cases, the Undying are manipulating the visions that Dany is seeing, and obviously Bloodraven is openly guiding Bran through his various weirwood paste encounters and stuff. So there's the catch. These wizards, meaning the Undying and Bloodraven, they are of course extending their lifespan through eating lots and lots and lots of psychedelic tree drugs. And they are, of course, using the magic of their trees to slowly enter a sort of half-alive, half-dead state. And this is done to obtain the secret knowledge of the past and the future and all that kind of stuff. Now, as viewers of this channel will know, this is all modeled off of Odin and Yggdrasil. And you can check out my Odin Origins Bloodraven video for more. But basically, most of what George Martin is doing with the idea of a tree wizard sort of, again, entering a half-dead alive state, being pinioned to the tree, gaining knowledge of all the realms. This is very much like Odin, who is hung on his tree Yggdrasil. It is Odin's tree. It's like a part of Odin in the same way that the Green Seer, not in the same way, but in a similar way that the Green Seer is a symbiotic part of the weirwood tree. And so the famous story about this is that
Vet ek at ek hek, vindga meði á, netr alar niu. Geri undada og gefin óðni, sjálfur sjálfu mer, at ein meði, mangi vet, versan af rótum ren.
Odin hangs on Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights, and then he sees the runes, and then he snatches them up, and he gains cosmic knowledge, etc., etc. Again, you can get the longer version on the video that you see on the screen right now. But yeah, both the Undying and Bloodraven are doing some version of this. They are using tree magic to extend their lives. They are sacrificing physical ability for sort of cosmic knowledge. That's the deal. So very much like Bran's Coma Dream vision and then his Weirwood Paste visions, Dany's House of the Undying visions foreshadow and set up her future arc. So for example, her conquest of Slaver's Bay and her liberation of its many slaves is referred to. Her pursuit of the mysteries around Rhaegar and the prince that was promised and the purpose of her dragons, which she's still working on and really just starting to make any sort of progress on. Those are alluded to. Her future encounters with a range of characters are referred to, and they're all depicted in symbols. So there's Stannis, Fagon and Jon Connington, and of course, Jon Snow. And then her and Drogon's battle against the actual Undying, who were trying to vampire Dany, as we've seen in so many great pieces of art. This one by Mark Simonetti is particularly disturbing. Her and Drogon's battle against the warlocks and the burning of the Shadow Heart and the whole House of the Undying. It foreshadows Dany and Drogon and probably Jon and some other people fighting the others in the heart of winter. You can get the full story on this in the video Born to Burn the Others, but just to run through this really quickly. The Undying are described as cold blue shadows, which the others are cold whitish blue shadows, so that's pretty close. The Undying, like the others, are partially insubstantial. They're somewhat shadow and somewhat solid. They've lived long past their mortal lifespan, perhaps centuries or even millennia. We don't know how old either of these groups are. The Undying are gathered around a cold blue shadow heart, which would seem like an obvious symbol for the heart of winter. To reach the Undying, you have to go through, well, again, the face, which is like the Black Gate, but also a dark, haunted forest. So we've got this grove of Shade of the Evening trees, and I think that compares very well to the others, who are described as shadows emerging from the dark of the wood, with that wood being the haunted forest. The Undying want to possess Dany, seemingly, and feed off of her magic, kind of magically vampire her, if you will. And it would make a lot of sense if that's what the others would like to do with Dany. And then most importantly, the Undying are flammable. They are roasted by the dragon fire, and we expect the White Walkers in the book, unlike the ones on the show, to also be flammable, because otherwise, what's the point? And there's also Dany's vision of melting Robert the Usurper's foes in the Trident, although they're armored in ice and seem like the others, and she's melting him with her dragon and really just having a great time with it. So check out Born to Burn the Others for more on that. And yes, I am wearing my shirt with the burning world to, well, you get it. Drogon and Dany are gonna burn some stuff at the top of the world. Now, the House of the Undying also sets up Euron, of course. He is guzzling that Shade of the Evening pretty hard, the purple drank, as they say, and he is using it just as the warlocks are, just as the Undying warlocks are. He is using it to implant visions in the mind of his brother Aeron Damphair, and that's in the Forsaken chapter of The Winds of Winter. It's one of the early release chapters from 8 years ago. Anyway, we know that Euron can use the Shade of the Evening to do that to Aeron because we saw the Undying do it to Dany. So this is setting up what's happening in the Forsaken back in A Clash of Kings. Now, Euron, of course, is attempting to become like a god. He's attempting to sort of outgrow the confines of his humanity much like the Undying. And he probably plans and wants to use Dany for magical sacrifice, Nissa Nissa style, as opposed to marrying her and treating her well. So that seems like a safe guess. And that, again, would be parallel to the Undying luring Dany in and, trying to vampire her. So that seems like it's coming. And of course, check out the Dracula Lore Summit that I did with Tim, where we got way into Euron's vampire symbolism and vampire Dracula role-playing sort of thing that he does. So Euron, through his use of Shade of the Evening and God knows what else, but mainly the Shade of the Evening, he is becoming like something of an alt-green seer, or you might even say a warlock lord. Shout out to Terry Brooks. He's some sort of wizard, and he's got a power that's equivalent and equal to the weirwood magic, but it's somehow even more sinister and off-putting than the weirwood magic, which is pretty sinister and off-putting, to be honest. All right, so there are several magical mysteries about the House of the Undying that immediately challenge our sense of reality, and Daenerys's as well. So it's a long, low, flat building, and yet Dany, when she gets in, pretty quickly begins to climb, and she climbs up and up and up and up this tower that doesn't really exist. So we're left to wonder, is Dany like on a treadmill in a room, thinking that she's walking somewhere and she's just in place? Is she just sitting in a chair, hallucinating the whole thing? We're probably not supposed to know. It's just supposed to be mysterious, and it is. So that's one thing that's going on. Then there's the dwarf, again, knee-high dwarf. We're talking, you can see from my foot to it's like 18 inches. We're talking 18 inches. Sorry if that was off mic, but just trying to bring the YouTube video to life. So yeah, what this tells us is that we don't know everything about human evolution, human-like. There's children of the forest, there's giants that are 14 feet, and there's 2-foot-tall dwarves. So the shade trees, most importantly, seem to be like weirwood trees, or weirder. I like to call them inverted. They've got black bark instead of white, and the leaves are dark blue instead of blood red. Blue and red obviously aren't opposite colors, but if we think about them as representing fire and ice, because the weirwood leaves are also described as a blaze of flame, then they become opposites. So they've got these parallel but inverted color schemes. They're producing very similar psychedelic substances, and the shade trees don't have carved faces, obviously, but then not all the weirwoods do either. We've seen weirwoods that are uncarved, so there you go. The big question here is, what are the shade trees? What are they really? It's been a question in the fandom for a long time. They're pretty hard to explain. My first potential answer is just that there are more than one species of magic tree or plant in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's not just the weirwoods. So potentially we've got oak trees. There's a lot about Garth the Green using oak trees. There's the oaken seat. It's a living throne made from a living oak tree. That sounds like a weirwood throne, but it's oak. And a lot of Garth's children are associated with oak in the Reach, so oak trees could be magic. There are now clues that the original weirwoods had green leaves. There's calendar art, and check out my video about the green weirwoods. But it could also be that all this oak tree stuff is actually referring to green weirwoods and that it became oak over time. But it could also be that these are just different things. Then we have the golden heart trees on the Summer Isles. There are multiple clues that those are magic. They are called the talking trees, and they are used for record keeping. They've got maps carved into them. Then we have whatever trees are in the forest of the Ifuk-Hevron, that weird forest north of the Dothraki Sea. Let me know if you want a video about that, where Lomas Longstrider says that he saw haunted silences and carved grottos, and the Dothraki basically talk about the little people that live there, and they're called the Woods Walkers. They seem like children of the forest. It seems like another pocket of children of the forest. So we don't know if they're weirwood trees there or some other kind of tree. So what trees are carved there? What carved trees are we talking about? And then in House of the Dragon Season 2, there was a little bit of a lore drop. There was a book that was used as a prop that refers to a gardener in Old Valyria. And there's all these weird magic plants. There's a bush that can get up and walk and replant itself, and some really weird stuff, to be honest. And I believe that is from George. It seems to be material that was cut from Fire and Blood / The World of Ice and Fire. So it's not quite canon, but it does seem like this is a fantasy world, and that there are multiple magic trees and plants, and it's just that the weirwood trees are the most important. Now, the other possibility is that the shade trees used to be weirwood trees. Maybe the green ones, maybe the red ones, and something happened to them. So the reason to think this is, first of all, they are so similar with the psychedelic drugs, with the colors, with the way they're used by the Undying versus the Green Seers. And if this is the case, the place to look is Asshai. I'll stop. Sorry, I'm doing the clapping thing today. Asshai is the place we want to look for this. Asshai is an entire peninsula that's been blighted through magic. There's a weird shadow that hangs over it, and only ghost grass grows there now. However, the mere size of Asshai and the clues that link it to the Great Empire of the Dawn indicate that it was once a thriving metropolis, in fact, the largest city in the world, the capital probably of the Great Empire of the Dawn, and so there's some clues about the Great Empire of the Dawn potentially being Green Seers, and we'll check out the Bloodstone Emperor was a Green Seer stream, which I'm going to record in a couple days with Tim, but which will be out by the time you see this video. And so, yeah, it could be that the shade trees essentially are poisoned by the disaster that blackened Asshai. I believe that would be a meteor, and I believe the oily black stone is either meteorite stone or stone created by the meteor impact, and it's Lovecraftian magic. And so if there were trees growing on the peninsula, it could be that. See, the thing is, the description of the shade trees is very similar to the oily black stone. Literally, when you drink the shade of the evening, it's oily and black. The oily black stone drinks the sunlight. Every description of it talks about it drinking the light or drinking the sunlight. So we're drinking a shade of the evening. It's like drinking darkness, and the stone drinks the light. So it's very similar. And of course, Amanda, Crowfood's daughter from the Disputed Lands YouTube channel, go check that one out if you don't know. She has a very well-developed theory that it's the other way around, that it is in fact the shade trees that petrify into the oily black stone. So just as the weirwood trees petrify into pale stone, perhaps the shade tree wood petrifies into the oily black stone. Maybe Asshai was entirely made out of the shade wood before the disaster, and now it's petrified oily stone. If you look at the map, you'll see that the continent of Olthos, in the Lands of Ice and Fire map book, looks like it is a forest of purple trees. So maybe that's a whole forest of shade trees. Maybe Asshai was built out of shade wood. It's a good theory. And the bottom line is that both Crowfood's daughter and I are pointing at the symbolic description of the oily stone and the shade trees and the links between Karth and Asshai and seeing a relationship. And we just have like the opposite order explanation for it. But we're both seeing a relationship there. So it does make sense for there to be a connection between Asshai and Karth. Perhaps these trees, however they were created, were essentially transplanted from Asshai. Like as the disaster was happening, at some point, maybe somebody transplanted this one grove of trees, because we don't see shade trees anywhere else, just in Karth, just in the House of the Undying. Maybe they're somewhere else, maybe they grow in Olthos. But yeah, it seems like this is a special grove. Maybe it was transplanted from Asshai or Olthos. And it also seems a lot like the Undying are sort of pretending at the legacy of the Great Empire of the Dawn. When Dany sees them, they're posing as ancient dragon lords, you know, in the sense that they could teach Dany the speech of dragonkind. They also talk about sending her the comet to show her the way. And essentially, I think this is kind of like the Undying's best guess of what the Great Empire of the Dawn gemstone emperors look like. And of course, Dany already saw them in book 1. And it's just a very similar appearance. So it could be that they are pretending at the legacy of the Great Empire of the Dawn. And then just for the Tolkien fans, I will point out that if shade trees were transplanted from Asshai to Karth, it's kind of like a dark and twisted version of Isildur saving a cutting from the Nimloth tree, which becomes the White Tree of Gondor. So that's what I got for you on what are the shade trees actually. What I can definitely tell you about the shade trees is that they symbolize the others and their relationship to the weirwoods. So I already talked about how the Undying are parallel to the others, and the Blue Shadow Heart is like the Heart of Winter. And then I pointed out that there's this haunted grove, kind of like the haunted forest, right? Well, think about heart trees. There's a blue beating heart. So it's a heart, literally a heart. It's got the blood in there. It's very good symbol of not only the heart of winter, but also the idea of a heart tree. So this has always led me to think that this is kind of like a model of what's in the heart of winter. And it suggests that we might see, you know, frozen weirwood trees. That's what the shade trees essentially look like. They look like frozen versions of weirwood trees, color inverted, ice coated, it's like a wordplay, coated and coated. Anyway, so yeah, I've always thought that in the heart of winter, we're going to see frozen weirwoods. And there was even an artist who drew that right there. You can see it. I forget the artist's name, but it's on the screen. And yes, so this is a frozen weirwood tree in the heart of winter. I'm not the only person that's had this idea. And one big clue about this is the Eyrie. The Eyrie is kind of like a symbolic ice temple. Check out the symbolism of the Eyrie, or symbolism of the veil, I believe it is. But yeah, what do we see in the throne room of this ice temple? 2 weirwood thrones for knights, king and queen, presumably. And so, when we get to the heart of winter, eventually, when Dany gets there, I suspect there's going to be some weirwood thrones, but they'll be covered in ice, so they'll be black. Or maybe they'll actually be shade of the evening trees, if the shade trees are transformed to weirwoods. It could be any of those things. And so, finally, just real quick to finish up, what is the origin of Karth? They claim to be the oldest city in the world, but that's probably not true. The World of Ice and Fire tells us that the Cathai people, that's the civilization that the Karthine used to be a part of, originated in the grasslands south of the Silver Sea, sometime after the kingdom of the Fisher Queens. Apparently, these Cathai settled the Red Waste before it was a waste, but then it became a waste. And also the Dothraki don't believe in planting or making cities, and they destroyed the cities of the Cathai. Now, Karth alone, it seems, survived, pretty much growing rich off of the maritime trade that are passing through the straits there. It's a very advantageous location. They developed, fleets and maritime power, and that is how Karth has prospered. Now, earlier I was mentioning there could be an ancient connection to the Great Empire of the Dawn and Ashai. Well, let's just think about Yi Ti. Yi Ti's been around since before the Long Night, at least the beginnings of their civilization, because they have historical records of the Long Night. And you can see that traders from Yi Ti would be passing right along the coast here, right through the spot that later would become Karth. So I would suspect there's always been a little town or settlement here, even before the Cathai migrated down here, and that they probably merged with those original townsfolk. And I'm just constructing world building here, but I'm using logic. This is a trade route. Trade routes are where cities spring up. And this is a trade route that passes, through this little bottleneck just south of the Bones Mountains and through these straits. So it's a very advantageous spot for somebody to set up a settlement. And that's just kind of how things go. They talk about that in ET. They say every city is built on the ruins of 3 older cities and towns. So it is likely that that's the case with Karth. Now, this hypothetical older Karth, this first settlement, it would have strong ties to Yi Ti. It would have been settled by people going along these trade routes. And that sets up the scenario I was talking about earlier, where people fleeing the Great Empire of the Dawn would have come along this exact trade route along the coast and maybe settled in Karth and, planted a few shade of the evening trees and formed a warlock temple. And there's also the Tourmaline Brotherhood. Could be nothing, but maybe that's a cult of, like a religious cult who reveres the wisdom of the Tourmaline Emperor, who is one of the emperors of the Great Empire of the Dawn. So, yeah, again, could be nothing, but I always like to think of them as having saved that one book of knowledge from the wise Tourmaline Emperor and having used it to start some sort of new cult or religion or study group. Maybe they're philosophers. In any case, that'll do it. Thanks for watching this video about the House of the Undying. And this will be a series. Next up will be the House of Black and White, and then we'll be doing Bloodraven's Cave, and then we'll get to the Nightford and the Wall and Hardhome and all kinds of other good places. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you never want to miss a video. And I'll have more coming at you. And of course, a live stream every Sunday. Right now, we've got them at 1 p.m. Pacific time. So come on through. I've been David Lightbringer, and thanks for watching.